Jake had been working at the same tech company for 3 years, and he thought he'd seen everything. The building was pretty standard, gray carpets, flickering fluorescent lights, and the same boring elevator music that played on repeat. But that Monday morning was different. Really different. He walked through the lobby like he always did, coffee in hand, ready for another day of staring at code on his computer screen. But something caught his eye near the reception desk. Someone was mopping the floor, and they definitely weren't human. The new janitor was tall, maybe 6 feet, with skin that looked like it had been painted with blue metallic paint. It shimmered when she moved, catching the light in ways that made Jake stop and stare. She had 4 arms, not to like everyone else, and they all moved in perfect coordination. As she cleaned, her uniform was the same as the old cleaning crew, just altered to fit her unique body. Jake tried not to stare. He'd heard on the news that Earth had made contact with aliens, but seeing one in person was completely different. She looked up and noticed him watching. Her eyes were huge and seemed to change color like soap bubbles. "Good morning," she said in a voice that sounded like it was coming through a speaker, but somehow musical at the same time. "I'm Zix47. You may call me Z for convenience." Hi," Jake managed to say. "I'm Jake. Nice to meet you." That's when it happened. Z suddenly turned around and bent over right in front of him. Not just a little bend. She was practically folded in half, all 4 arms reaching down to the floor. Jake stood there frozen, not sure what to do or where to look. She stayed like that for what felt like forever. Jake counted the seconds in his head. 10, 15, 20. Other people walking by didn't seem to notice anything weird. Some even smiled and waved at Z, who somehow managed to wave back with one of her arms while staying bent over. Jake said quietly, "Are you okay?" Z straightened up slowly and turned to face him. "Of course, this is customary greeting posture on my home planet. It shows respect and acknowledgement of your presence." "Oh," Jake said, feeling stupid. "I didn't know. Sorry." "No apology necessary," Z replied. "I understand Earth customs are different. I am still learning." Jake nodded and hurried to the elevator, his face burning with embarrassment. He felt like everyone was looking at him, even though most people were just going about their normal morning routine. The elevator ride to the 5th floor gave him time to think. He'd never dealt with alien culture before. Maybe bending over was totally normal where she came from. He shouldn't judge based on human standards. That would be wrong. When the elevator doors opened, Jake practically ran to his desk. His cubicle was in the middle of the floor, surrounded by dozens of other workstations. He sat down and tried to focus on his computer, but his mind kept wandering back to the strange encounter. About an hour later, Jana from HR sent out an email to everyone in the building. The subject line read, "Important Workplace Sensitivity Guidelines." Jake opened it immediately. The email explained that the company was proud to be the first in the city to employ an extraterrestrial worker. It reminded everyone to be respectful of different cultural practices and to avoid making assumptions about behavior that might seem unusual. There was a whole section about being inclusive and understanding. Jake felt even worse after reading it. He probably made Z feel unwelcome by acting so awkward. He decided he'd apologize the next time he saw her and try to be more understanding. But he didn't have to wait long. Around lunchtime, Jake was walking to the break room when he saw Z cleaning the hallway. She was using all 4 arms to wipe down the walls, moving with incredible efficiency. When she noticed Jake approaching, she immediately stopped what she was doing. "Here we go again," Jake thought. Sure enough, Z turned around and bent over directly in front of him. This time, Jake was ready. He stood there patiently, trying to look respectful while she held the position. A few coworkers walked by and gave him curious looks, but he just smiled and waited. After about 30 seconds, Z straightened up. "Thank you for your patience," she said. "Your respect for my customs is appreciated." "No problem," Jake replied, though he still felt uncomfortable. "How are you liking the job so far?" "It is satisfactory," Z said, picking up her cleaning supplies. "Your building has interesting architecture." The geometric patterns in the ceiling tiles are quite pleasing. Jake looked up. He'd never noticed any patterns in the ceiling tiles. They just looked like regular white squares to him. That's great, he said. As he continued to the break room, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Not about Z being an alien. That part was actually pretty cool once he got used to it, but something about the whole bending over thing felt strange. He grabbed his sandwich from the refrigerator and sat down at one of the small tables. A few minutes later, his co-worker Danny joined him. "So what's the deal with the new janitor?" Danny asked, unwrapping his lunch. "I saw her doing some weird stuff earlier. It's cultural." Jake explained. "She's from another planet, different. Customs, right, but..." Danny lowered his voice. "I've been watching. And she only does that bending thing when you're around. She cleans normally around everyone else." Jake paused mid-bite. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've seen her cleaning all morning, and she stands up straight like anyone else. But the second you show up, boom, she's doing gymnastics in front of you." Jake thought about this. He'd only encountered Z twice, both times resulting in the same strange greeting ritual. But Danny worked on the third floor and would have seen her throughout the building. "Are you sure?" Jake asked. "Positive. Ask anyone. She's totally normal until you walk by." This information made Jake's stomach twist. If Danny was right, then maybe this wasn't about alien customs at all. Maybe there was something else going on. He finished his lunch quickly and headed back to his desk. But his mind was racing. He tried to focus on his work, but every few minutes he'd glance around, wondering if Z was nearby. Around 3 o'clock, Jake needed to go to the supply closet to get more printer paper. He walked down the hallway cautiously, looking both ways. Like he was crossing a busy street, the coast seemed clear. He was reaching for the paper when he heard the familiar sound of wheels on linoleum. Z's cleaning cart was approaching. Jake's heart rate picked up as he grabbed the paper and tried to make a quick exit. Too late. Z rounded the corner just as Jake stepped out of the supply closet. Their eyes met, and Jake could see what was coming next. "Good afternoon," Z said pleasantly. "Hi," Jake replied, already backing away. But Z had already turned around and assumed the position. This time, Jake noticed something he'd missed before. She was positioned perfectly in his line of sight, blocking his path down the hallway. He couldn't go round her without being rude, and he couldn't go back the way he came because that would take him away from his desk. He stood there feeling trapped, watching Z's forearms move in slow, deliberate motions as she cleaned the same spot on the floor over and over again. Other employees walked by without any trouble, but Jake remained stuck in place. After what felt like 5 minutes, Z finally straightened up. "Thank you for your patience with my customs," she said again. "Sure," Jake said weakly, hurrying past her. Back at his desk, Jake couldn't concentrate on anything. Danny's words kept echoing in his head. "She only does that bending thing when you're round." If that was true, then what did it mean? He spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work, but his productivity was shot. Every sound in the hallway made him look up nervously. He felt like he was being watched, even though that was probably just his imagination. At 5 o'clock, Jake packed up his things and headed for the elevator. He was almost there when he heard the familiar sound of the cleaning cart behind him. His shoulders tensed as he waited for the elevator to arrive. The doors opened just as Z rounded the corner. Jake stepped inside quickly and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors started to close, he caught a glimpse of Z watching him with those strange, shimmering eyes. During the ride down, Jake tried to make sense of everything. Maybe Danny was wrong. Maybe Z really was just following her planet's customs. But if that was the case, why did it feel so targeted? The elevator reached the lobby, and Jake walked quickly toward the exit. He was almost at the door when he heard his name being called. "Jake," it was Z's musical voice, coming from behind him. He turned around reluctantly. Z was standing by the reception desk, not cleaning anything, just standing there looking at him. "I hope you have a pleasant evening," she said. "Thanks," Jake replied. "You too." As he walked to his car, Jake couldn't help but feel like this was just the beginning of something much more complicated than simple cultural differences. The next morning, Jake woke up with a knot in his stomach. He'd spent half the night thinking about what Danny had said. Does he really only do that weird bending thing around him? There was only one way to find out. He decided to test it. Jake arrived at work 15 minutes early and positioned himself near the elevator, where he could see the lobby. He pretended to check his phone while watching Z clean the reception area. She moved normally, using all four arms to dust furniture and wipe down surfaces. Her movements were fluid and efficient, just like any other janitor. A few early employees walked by and said good morning. Z would pause, nod politely, and continue working. No bending, no weird poses, just normal cleaning. Jake felt a mix of relief and confusion. Maybe Danny was wrong after all. Maybe yesterday was just a coincidence. But then Z looked up and spotted him across the lobby. Even from 30 feet away, Jake could see her large eyes focusing on him. She immediately stopped what she was doing, turned around, and bent over directly facing his direction. Jake's heart sank. Danny was right. He quickly got on the elevator and went to his floor, but his mind was racing. If this wasn't about alien customs, then what was it about, and why him specifically? Throughout the morning, Jake tried to focus on his work, but he kept glancing toward the hallway. He could hear Z's cleaning cart moving around the building, and every sound made him tense up. Around 10 o'clock, Jake needed to use the bathroom. He peeked out of his cubicle first, looking both ways like he was crossing a dangerous street. The coast seemed clear, so he made a quick dash down the hallway. He was almost to the bathroom when he heard the familiar squeak of wheels on linoleum. Z's cart was coming round the corner. Jake panicked and ducked into the nearest doorway, which happened to be the supply closet. Through the crack in the door, Jake watched Z roll her cart past. She paused right outside the supply closet and looked around, as if she was searching for something or someone. Jake held his breath and stayed perfectly still. After what felt like forever, Z continued down the hallway. Jake waited another minute before sneaking out and hurrying to the bathroom. This is ridiculous, he thought. He was hiding from the janitor like some kind of criminal. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with this situation. After lunch, Jake decided to confide in his cubicle neighbor, Lisa. She was practical and down to earth, and maybe she could help him figure out what was going on. So let me get this straight, Lisa said, leaning back in her chair. You think the alien janitor is targeting you specifically? I know it sounds crazy, Jake said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. But I've been watching, and she only does that bending thing when I'm around. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Maybe their species just has really good peripheral vision or something. Maybe she can sense when you're nearby. That's what I thought at first, Jake said. But it's not just that. It's like she's positioning herself always right in front of me, always blocking my path. Have you tried talking to her about it? Jake shook his head. Every time I try to have a conversation, she goes into that pose and talks about customs and respect. I can't get a straight answer. Lisa was quiet for a moment. You know what? Let me observe for myself. I'll walk with you next time you encounter her. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Around 2 o'clock, Jake and Lisa were walking back from the break room when they spotted Z cleaning the water fountain. Jake felt his stomach drop. Just act natural, Lisa whispered. They approached the fountain area normally, chatting about work stuff. Z looked up and saw them coming. Her eyes immediately locked onto Jake. And sure enough, she turned around and bent over right in front of him. Lisa stopped talking mid-sentence. She watched as Z maintained the position for nearly a minute, all four arms moving in slow, deliberate motions as she cleaned the same spot over and over again. Wow, Lisa whispered. You weren't kidding. What made it even more obvious was that other people kept walking by without any issues. A guy from accounting walked past and said hello to Z. She managed to wave with one arm while staying bent over him, then immediately went back to her cleaning motions. When Z finally straightened up, she looked directly at Jake. Thank you for your patience with my customs, she said in that musical voice. Sure, Jake replied weakly. As they walked away, Lisa was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke up. Okay, that was definitely weird. She completely ignored me and focused only on you. I told you, Jake said, feeling vindicated, but also more worried than before. And did you notice how she positioned herself? She could have cleaned that fountain from any angle, but she chose to face you directly. Jake nodded. He noticed that too. So what do you think it means? Lisa shrugged. I have no idea, but it's definitely not normal behavior, alien customs. Or not, the rest of the week followed the same pattern. Jake would try to go about his normal routine, but every encounter with Z became an awkward dance of avoidance. He started timing his bathroom breaks and coffee runs, trying to figure out Z's cleaning schedule. But somehow, she always seemed to know where he was going. If he took the stairs instead of the elevator, she'd be there mopping the landing. If he went to the copy room, she'd be cleaning the machines. If he tried to leave through the back exit, she'd be there emptying trash cans by Friday. Jake was exhausted. He'd spent the entire week on high alert, constantly looking over his shoulder and planning alternate routes through the building. His work was suffering, and he was starting to get weird looks from his co-workers. The breaking point came during the afternoon. Jake was trapped in his cubicle because he had been cleaning the area around his desk for over an hour. She moved her cart right next to his workspace and was methodically cleaning every surface. Within a 10-foot radius, every few minutes, she'd bend over in front of his desk, always facing him, always holding the position just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Other people could walk by freely, but Jake felt like he was in some kind of invisible prison. He tried putting on headphones and focusing on his computer screen, but he could feel her presence. Even when he wasn't looking directly at her, he knew she was there, moving around his workspace with those forearms, cleaning things that didn't need to be cleaned. Finally, Jake couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. He needed to get out of the building, even if it meant leaving work early. But as the elevator doors opened, there was Z, standing inside with her cart. She looked up at him with those shimmering eyes and smiled. Going down, she asked in her musical voice. Jake stared at her for a long moment. This couldn't be a coincidence. There was no way she just happened to be in the elevator at the exact moment he needed to escape. I'll take the stairs, he said, backing away as he walked toward the stairwell. Jake could feel Z watching him through the elevator doors. He didn't turn around, but he could sense her presence like a weight on his back. That weekend, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the situation. He'd gone from being curious about alien culture to feeling like he was being stalked. And the worst part was, he had no idea what Z wanted or why she was focusing on him specifically. He knew he needed to do something about it, but what? He couldn't exactly file a complaint about being culturally greeted too much, and he definitely couldn't accuse Earth's first alien employee of harassment without some kind of proof. As Sunday night approached, Jake dreaded going back to work. He'd spent 5 days playing an exhausting game of hide-and-seek with an alien janitor, and he was no closer to understanding what was really going on. But one thing was certain. This wasn't about customs or respect or cultural differences. This was about something else entirely, and Jake was determined to find out what. Monday morning came too soon. Jake sat in his car in the parking lot, staring at the office building like it was some kind of fortress he had to storm. He'd spent the entire weekend thinking about Z and her strange behavior, and he'd come to one conclusion. He needed answers. He couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over his shoulder and planning escape routes. If Z's actions weren't really about alien customs, then what were they about? And more importantly, how could he find out without making things worse? Jake decided to do some research. He pulled out his phone and searched for information about Z's home planet. The internet had surprisingly little detail about Kepler-440b or its inhabitants. Most articles just mentioned that contact had been established recently, and that cultural exchanges were still being studied. Nothing about greeting, customs, nothing about bending over, nothing that explained what Jake had been experiencing. He found a few news articles about other alien workers who had been hired in different cities. A construction worker in Denver, a librarian in Seattle, a chef in Miami. None of the articles mentioned any unusual behavior or cultural practices that seemed anything like what Z was doing. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his friend Mike, who worked at a law firm downtown. Hey, weird question, didn't you say your building hired an alien janitor? We had one here for a few weeks last month. She was interesting. Jake's heart rate picked up. He quickly called Mike back. What do you mean interesting? Jake asked without even saying hello. Hello to you too, Mike laughed. I just meant she had some weird habits, always bending over in front of this one guy in our office. Poor Tony thought he was losing his mind. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. What happened? Well, Tony complained to HR, but before they could do anything about it, she just stopped showing up, found a new job, I guess. Why? Just curious, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. Thanks, man. Jake hung up and sat in his car, processing this information. So he had done this before, to someone else, at a different job. This definitely wasn't about alien customs. But what was it about? He finally worked up the courage to go inside. The lobby looked normal, with Z cleaning the reception area like she did every morning. Jake tried to walk quickly to the elevator, but she spotted him immediately. Here we go again, Jake thought as he turned around and assumed the position. But this time, Jake didn't just stand there politely. He walked around her, giving her a wide berth, and headed straight for the elevator. Excuse me, Z called out, straightening up. It is considered rude to walk away during the greeting ritual. Jake turned around. I'm sorry, but I'm running late for a meeting. It was a lie, but he needed some excuse to avoid the awkward encounter. Z looked confused, her large eyes blinking rapidly. I understand, she said finally. Perhaps we can complete the proper greeting later. Jake nodded and got on the elevator, but he could feel her watching him as the doors closed at his desk. Jake tried to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering. He needed to talk to someone in authority about this situation, but he wasn't sure. Hoop HR seemed like the obvious choice, but what would he say? That the alien janitor was greeting him too much? Around lunchtime, Jake decided to take action. He walked to the HR office and knocked on the door. Linda, the HR manager, looked up from her computer. Hi, Jake. What can I do for you? Jake sat down and tried to organize his thoughts. I wanted to talk to you about Z, the new janitor. Linda's expression became more serious. Is there a problem? Well, maybe. It's about her greeting customs. She keeps doing this bending over thing, but only when I'm around. I've been watching, and she doesn't do it with anyone else. Linda leaned back in her chair. That's interesting. We actually received some guidelines about respecting alien customs, but they were pretty vague. I did some research, Jake said. I can't find any information about these greeting customs online. And I talked to someone whose office had an alien worker before, and she did the same thing there. Linda's eyebrows went up. Really? What happened at the other job? She left before they could address it, but the point is, this isn't normal behavior, even for her species. Linda was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen on her desk. You know, I've been meaning to look into this more thoroughly. We got so focused on being inclusive and respectful that we might have missed some red flags. What kind of red flags? Well, for one thing, Z's employment application was pretty sparse. Most of the references were off-world contacts we couldn't verify, and her previous employer gave a very brief, generic recommendation. Jake felt a surge of validation. So what can we do about it? Linda sighed. Let me make some calls. I'll reach out to the company that handles interspecies employment placements and see if they have any additional information about appropriate workplace behavior. Jake left the HR office feeling better than he had in weeks. At least someone was taking his concerns seriously. But as he walked back to his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Sure enough, when he looked up, Z was standing at the end of the hallway with her cleaning cart, staring directly at him. The moment their eyes met, she started moving toward him. Jake panicked. He ducked into the nearest office, which happened to belong to his supervisor, Tom. Jake, what are you doing? Tom looked up from his computer, confused. Sorry, Jake peered out the door. Z was getting closer. I need to ask you something about the quarterly reports. It was another lie, but Tom seemed to buy it. They talked about work stuff for a few minutes while Jake kept an eye on the hallway. When Z finally moved on, Jake made his excuses and left. This is getting ridiculous, he thought. He was hiding in his boss's office like some kind of fugitive. Something had to change. That afternoon, Jake decided to try a different approach. Instead of avoiding Z, he would confront her directly, not rudely, but firmly. He would ask her straight out what was going on. The opportunity came around 3 o'clock. Jake was walking to the copy room when he saw Z cleaning the water fountain. She looked up and spotted him, and Jake could see her preparing to turn. "Round, Z," he said quickly, before she could assume the position. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She paused, looking uncertain. "Of course. But first, I must perform the proper greeting." "Actually, I'd like to talk about that," Jake said. Stepping closer, "I'm curious about your planet's customs. Can you tell me more about them?" Z's eyes seemed to brighten. "Certainly. On Kepler 4 for to be. Showing respect through physical positioning is very important. The greeting posture demonstrates acknowledgement of another being's presence and worth." "That's interesting," Jake said, trying to sound casual. "And this applies to everyone on your planet?" "Yes, of course. So if I visited your planet, everyone would greet me this way." Z hesitated for just a moment. "Well, the customs can vary depending on the individual and the situation," Jake pressed on. "And you do this greeting with everyone here at work?" Another pause. "The customs are complex. Different relationships require different approaches." Jake felt like he was getting somewhere. "What makes our relationship different from your relationships with other people here?" Z's forearms fidgeted with her cleaning supplies. The customs are difficult to explain to someone not familiar with our culture." "I'm trying to understand," Jake said gently. "But it seems like you only do this greeting with me. That makes me think maybe it's not really about customs at all." Z's shimmering eyes widened. And for a moment, Jake thought she might actually tell him the truth. But then she straightened up and her expression became more formal. "I must return to my duties," she said. "Perhaps we can discuss cultural matters another time." She turned around and assumed the position anyway, effectively ending the conversation. Jake stood there for a moment, frustrated but also oddly hopeful. Her hesitation and evasive answers told him everything he needed to know. This definitely wasn't about alien customs. Now he just had to figure out what it was really about. Jake spent the next 2 days feeling like he was living in some kind of bizarre reality show. Every time he turned a corner, there was Z with her cleaning cart, ready to perform her mysterious ritual. But now that he knew it wasn't really about alien customs, the whole thing felt even more uncomfortable. On Wednesday morning, Linda from HR called him into her office. She looked tired, like she'd been dealing with a complicated problem. "For ours, I made those calls I promised," she said, gesturing for Jake to sit down. "And what I found out is pretty interesting." Jake leaned forward. "What did you learn?" "Well, first of all, the Interspecies Employment Agency was very surprised to hear about these so-called greeting customs. They said they'd never encountered anything like that in their cultural briefings." Jake felt his suspicions confirmed. So it's not normal, not even close. In fact, they did some checking on their end and found out that Z's previous employer filed a similar complaint. Apparently, she was doing the exact same thing there. "My friend Mike mentioned that," Jake said. "But what does it mean?" Linda pulled out a folder and opened it. "That's where things get really interesting. I also reached out to some xenocultural experts, and they gave me some background on Z's species. And according to them, Z's people do have complex social customs, but they're nothing like what she's been describing. Their actual greeting involves a specific hand gesture and a verbal acknowledgement, no bending over involved." Jake felt a mix of relief and confusion. So she's been lying about her customs. It seems that way, but the question is why? Linda looked at him seriously. "The experts I talked to mentioned something else. On Z's planet, this kind of behavior might actually mean something completely different." "Like what?" Linda hesitated. "Well, according to what they told me. Positioning yourself that way in front of someone is actually, well, it's a courtship behavior. Jake's mouth fell open. You mean she's trying to get your attention romantically? Yes, apparently. Her species has very indirect ways of showing interest in someone. Jake sat back in his chair, processing this information. Everything suddenly made sense. The targeting, the positioning, the way she only did it around him. So all this time, she's been flirting with you in her own way. Linda closed the folder. The problem is, she's been using our cultural sensitivity as a cover story. Jake felt embarrassed and frustrated at the same time. So what do we do about it? Well, that's the tricky part. Technically, she hasn't broken any rules. She's been doing her job, and up until now, we thought she was just following her cultural practices. But she's been lying about those practices. True, but proving that she intentionally misled us is complicated. Plus, we have to be careful about how we handle this. We don't want to seem like we're discriminating against her because she's an alien. Jake rubbed his forehead. This is so weird. I mean, I barely know her. We've had maybe 3 real conversations. That might not matter to her species, Linda said. Different cultures have different ways of forming attachments. So what are my options? Linda thought for a moment. Well, you could try talking to her directly, explain that her behavior is making you uncomfortable, and ask her to stop. I tried that already. She just keeps insisting it's about customs and respect. Then we might need to have a more formal conversation. I could call her in here and address it officially. Jake wasn't sure that was the right approach either. Let me try talking to her one more time. But this time, I'll be more direct about what I know. The opportunity came that afternoon. Jake was heading to the supply closet when he spotted Z's car parked nearby. Instead of trying to avoid her, he walked straight toward the sound of cleaning. He found her in the small storage room, organizing supplies with all 4 arms moving efficiently. When she saw him, her eyes lit up and she immediately started to turn around. Z, wait, Jake said quickly. Before you do that, I need to talk to you. She paused, looking uncertain. I must perform the proper greeting first. Actually, that's what I want to talk about. I've been doing some research about your planet's customs. Z's expression changed slightly. Research? Yeah, and I talked to some experts who know about your species. They told me some interesting things about your real greeting customs, Z's. Her arms stopped moving. She stood perfectly still, like she was frozen. They said your people actually greet each other with hand gestures and words. Nothing involving bending over. For a long moment, Z didn't say anything. Her large eyes seemed to shift colors, going from their usual shimmering blue to something more like purple. They also told me, Jake continued gently, that the behavior you've been showing might mean something completely different on your planet. Z's shoulders sagged. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. You spoke to cultural experts. Yes, and they explained that what you've been doing is actually a way of showing romantic interest. Z looked down at the floor. This is very embarrassing. Jake felt a strange mix of sympathy and relief. So it's true, you've been lying. About the customs? Not lying exactly, Z said, still not looking at him. On my planet, we do value respect and proper acknowledgement. But you are correct that the specific behavior I have been displaying is not a greeting. Then why did you tell me it was? Z finally looked up at him. Because humans seem to value cultural explanations. I thought if I presented it as a custom, you would accept it more easily. Accept what more easily? My interest in you. Her voice was barely above a whisper. On my planet, we are taught to be very indirect about romantic feelings. We believe that obvious displays of interest are crude. Jake didn't know what to say. He'd been so focused on figuring out what was going on that he hadn't really considered how to handle the truth once he found it. Z, he said carefully, I'm flattered, but this approach has been making me really uncomfortable. I had no idea what you were trying to communicate. I realize that now. I studied human behavior before coming to Earth, but I think I may have consulted the wrong sources. What kind of sources? Z's skin seemed to shimmer with embarrassment. Entertainment videos from your internet. I thought they were educational materials about human courtship. Jake almost laughed despite the awkward situation. You mean like movies, perhaps? They showed humans engaging in various behaviors to attract mates. I thought the indirect approach would be appreciated. Z, those aren't real life. They're just stories. I am beginning to understand that. She looked miserable. I have made a terrible mistake. Jake felt bad for her. She'd been trying to show interest in the only way she knew how, based on bad information about human behavior. But he also needed to be clear about his own feelings. Look, Z, you seem like a nice person, being whatever. But I'm not interested in a romantic relationship, and even if I was. This approach was just confusing and uncomfortable. Z nodded sadly. I understand. I have behaved inappropriately. It's not that you're inappropriate, Jake said, trying to be kind. It's just that humans communicate differently. If someone is interested in us, we prefer direct conversation. Direct conversation, Z repeated, like she was taking notes. Right, like, would you like to get coffee sometime? Or I think you're interesting and I'd like to get to know you better. Z looked fascinated. So simple, so efficient, exactly. They stood there for a moment in awkward silence. Finally, Z spoke up. I apologize for the confusion I have caused. I will return to normal cleaning procedures. Thank you, Jake said. And Z, maybe next time you're interested in someone, just try talking to them first. I will remember that advice. As Jake walked back to his desk, he felt like a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The mystery was solved, and hopefully, the weird encounters would stop. But he also felt a little bad for Z. She'd just been trying to connect with someone in the only way she thought would work. At least now they could both move forward with a better understanding of each other. The next morning, Jake walked into the office feeling more relaxed than he had in weeks. He finally gotten to the bottom of the Z situation, and hopefully, things could go back to normal. As he passed through the lobby, he saw Z cleaning the reception area as usual. When she noticed him, she paused and gave him a small wave with one of her forearms. No bending over, no weird positioning, just a normal, friendly acknowledgement. Jake waved back and continued to the elevator, feeling like he could finally breathe again. But as the day went on, Jake started to feel a little guilty. Z looked genuinely sad whenever he saw her around the building. She was doing her job perfectly well. But there was something different about her demeanor. Her movements seemed less energetic, and she kept her eyes down most of the time. During lunch, Jake mentioned this to Lisa, who had witnessed some of the weird encounters earlier. Maybe she's just embarrassed, Lisa suggested. I mean, think about it from her perspective. She tried to show interest in someone using what she thought was the right approach, and it completely backfired. I tried to be nice about it, Jake said. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I'm sure you were. But rejection is never easy, no matter what planet you're from. Jake thought about this. He didn't want Z to feel bad, but he also didn't want to send mixed signals. The situation was complicated enough already. Over the next few days, things settled into a new routine. Z continued doing her job normally, and Jake could move around the building without feeling like he was being stalked. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. On Friday afternoon, Jake was working late when he heard a commotion in the hallway. He looked up to see several people gathered around Z's cleaning cart. She was sitting on the floor next to it, looking distressed. Jake hurried over to see what was wrong. Is everything okay? Tom, his supervisor, looked up. Z slipped and hurt her ankle. We're trying to figure out if we should call a doctor or... Do you need medical attention for your species? Linda from HR asked Z. Z shook her head. No, I will be fine. I just need to rest for a moment. Here, let me help you up, Jake said, extending his hand. Z looked surprised but accepted his help. She was lighter than he expected, and she managed to stand with only a slight wobble. Thank you, she said quietly. No problem. Can you walk? Okay. Z took a few careful steps. Yes, I believe so. Maybe you should take it easy for the rest of the day, Tom suggested. I still have work to complete. Z protested. It can wait until Monday, Linda said firmly. Your health is more important. As the crowd dispersed, Jake found himself walking with Z toward the elevator. She was moving slowly, favoring her injured ankle. Are you sure you're okay? Jake asked. I will recover. My species heals quickly. They rode the elevator down in silence. When they reached the lobby, Z turned to Jake. Thank you for helping me, she said. You did not have to do that. Of course I did. Just because we cleared up that misunderstanding doesn't mean we can't be friendly co-workers. Z's eyes seemed to brighten a little. Friendly co-workers? Sure. I mean, we work in the same building. We should be able to have normal conversations and help each other out when needed. I would like that, Z said. I have not had many friendly co-workers since coming to Earth. Jake felt a pang of sympathy. Really? Why not? Most humans seem uncomfortable around me. They are polite, but distant. I think they are not sure how to interact with someone from another planet. Jake thought about this. He'd been so focused on his own discomfort with Z's behavior that he hadn't considered how isolating her experience might be. That must be lonely, he said. It is. On my planet. We are very social beings. Working in isolation is difficult. They walked toward the parking garage together, Z still moving carefully on her injured ankle. Can I ask you something? Jake said. Why did you choose to come to Earth? Z was quiet for a moment. My planet is very structured. Everyone has predetermined roles based on their family lineage. I wanted to experience something different. And you chose to be a janitor? Cleaning is actually a respected profession on my planet. We believe that maintaining order and cleanliness creates harmony. But here, I have discovered it is viewed differently. Jake felt bad about his assumptions. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound judgmental. You did not. You were simply curious. Z stopped walking and looked at him. May I ask you something? Sure. When you helped me today, you did not hesitate, even after our misunderstanding. Why? Jake shrugged. Because you needed help. That's what decent people do. Decent people. Z repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I'm learning that Earth has many decent people. They reached Z's vehicle, which looked like a normal car, but with some unusual modifications to accommodate her forearms. I hope your ankle feels better, Jake said. Thank you. And Jake, yeah? I am sorry again for the confusion I caused. I will be more direct in my communications from now on. Don't worry about it. We all make mistakes when we're trying to figure out new situations. As Jake walked to his own car, he realized that this was the first normal conversation he'd ever had with Z, without the weird behavior and cultural misunderstandings. She was actually pretty interesting to talk to. The following Monday, Jake noticed that Z seemed more like her old self. She was moving with her usual efficiency, and she even smiled and said good morning when she saw him. But there was something different about her approach to the job. She was talking to other employees more, asking questions about their work and making small talk while she cleaned. Jake watched as she had a conversation with Danny about the sports scores, and later saw her helping an intern who had dropped a stack of papers. During his lunch break, Jake ran into Z in the break room. She was sitting at one of the small tables, eating what looked like a very colorful salad. Mind if I sit? Jake asked. Please do, Z said, gesturing to the chair across from her. How's the ankle? Much better, thank you. You were right about my species healing quickly. Good to hear. And how are you liking the job lately? You seem to be getting along better with everyone, Z smiled. And Jake noticed that her expression was much more relaxed than before. I took your advice about direct communication. It has made things much easier. Really? How so? Well, instead of trying to guess what people want or need, I simply ask them. And instead of waiting for others to approach me, I initiate conversations. Myself. That's great. I noticed you were talking to Danny earlier. Yes, he was explaining your sport called basketball. It is quite complex, but very interesting. They chatted for a few more minutes about work and Earth culture. Jake found himself enjoying the conversation. Z had a unique perspective on human behavior that was both insightful and amusing. As they prepared to leave, Z turned to Jake. I want to thank you again. For what? For treating me like a normal person, even when I was behaving strangely, and for teaching me about direct communication. It has improved my life on Earth significantly. I'm glad things are working out better for you. They are. And I have learned something important about human relationships. What's that? That friendship is often more valuable than romance. The connections I am building with my coworkers are meaningful in ways I did not expect. Jake smiled. That's a pretty wise observation. I am still learning, but I think I am beginning to understand Earth culture better. As they walked back to work, Jake reflected on how much the situation had changed. What had started as an uncomfortable and confusing experience had somehow turned into a genuine friendship. Z was no longer the mysterious alien who made him nervous, but rather a colleague who offered an interesting perspective on the world around them. And while Jake was definitely not interested in a romantic relationship with Z, he was glad they'd found a way to connect as friends. After all, the universe was a big place, and having someone from another planet to talk to was actually pretty cool. By the end of the week, Jake realized that the whole experience had taught him something important too. Sometimes the best relationships come from the most unexpected situations, and being open to friendship can lead to connections you never saw coming, even if they start with the most awkward misunderstandings imaginable.